There are stories that live in the shadows of history, breathing in the dust of forgotten archives. They are not merely fictions, but persistent whispers that have trailed humanity for centuries. Ideas that surface in moments of profound ambition or soul-scraping despair. These are the stories of a bargain, a transaction made at the far edge of reason, where the currency is not coin, but consequence. The enduring narrative of a deal with the devil is an elemental human fascination, a primal fear wrapped around a kernel of want. What would a person trade for their deepest desire? And what if the price was the very essence of themselves? This is a journey into that shadowed territory. We will trace the echoes of this idea from its ancient roots to the scholar's desperate quest for forbidden knowledge and the musician's gamble for otherworldly talent. We will explore these stories, pacts with the devil, and in doing so, we will descend into the depths of myth and the human psyche. The pact holds up a mirror, forcing us to ask, what lines would you cross to get everything you've ever wanted? Long before the Christian world gave the adversary a name and a formal portfolio of temptation, the impulse to bargain with unseen forces ran deep in the current of human history. The ancient world was a wilder place, thrumming with mysteries and powers that dwelt just beyond the veil of the mundane. Interaction with these forces was often a matter of commerce, a supernatural economy. Among some northern peoples, dealings with household sprites or nature spirits were conducted with a pragmatism not unlike hiring earthly help. Terms were set, services rendered, and dues were paid. One might leave a bowl of fresh milk for a brownie in exchange for a tidy home, a simple transaction. These early forms of contract, built on reciprocity rather than ruin, lacked the stark, soul-searing gravity that would later define the diabolical pact. They were bargains for favour, not for dominion over a soul. The evolution toward a singular, arch-enemy was a gradual process, a shadow stretching over the theological landscape as cultures and religions bled into one another. It crept out of the East, from the dualistic cosmology of Persian Zoroastrianism. There, the universe was a battlefield between a god of light and a spirit of pure destruction, Ahriman. In ancient texts, this being of pure malice attempts to tempt the prophet Zoroaster himself, offering him the world if he will only renounce the righteous path. The template of temptation by a singular, ultimate evil was being forged. This idea found its most lurid expression in the Persian epic, the Shah-Nameh of Ferdowsi. Here, the demon Iblis strikes a bargain with the Arabian prince Zohak. He doesn't just offer vague power, he offers to make Zohak's reign supreme. The deal is consecrated not with a signature, but with a sign of fealty, a kiss. But where Iblis's lips touch Zohak's shoulders, two black serpents sprout, hideous and alive, coiling with a sentient hunger. A hunger, the demon explains, that can only be sated by feeding them the brains of men, one each day. The price of power becomes a daily tribute of horror. Such narratives, rich with the imagery of temptation, corruption, and a terrible, ongoing price, are believed to have permeated Jewish religious thought during the Babylonian captivity, later filtering into the fertile ground of a new religion, Christianity. It was here, particularly in the ironclad certainty of medieval Europe, that the devil got his formal introduction. No longer just one nasty spirit among many, he was the adversary, the ultimate rebel, the fallen star. And with this promotion came a chilling change in the nature of the contract. The currency was now the soul. Think of it, your soul, the very thing that makes you you, your moral compass, your spark of the divine, your ticket to whatever comes next. Traded for what? Youth, knowledge, wealth, fame. The devil's menu has always been short, but it has always catered to the deepest, most desperate hungers of the human heart. One of the earliest and most influential Christian narratives to codify these themes is the story of Theophilus of Adana, a cleric of the 6th century. His tale, allegedly recorded by an eyewitness, Eutychianus of Adana, serves as a chilling prototype, a case study in spiritual treason. Theophilus was an archdeacon, by all accounts a man of genuine humility, who had even refused a promotion to bishop. But humility is a fragile shield against injustice. A new bishop, swayed by what Eutychianus described as malicious and unfounded rumours, unjustly stripped Theophilus of his position. In that moment of public humiliation, a very human poison took root, a cocktail of wounded pride and thwarted ambition. It was this poison that drove him to seek help, not from the heavens he had served, but from the shadows of the earth. He sought out a necromancer, a man who knew the secret paths, the hidden channels to the infernal realms. The meeting was arranged. The terms laid out were stark and absolute. In exchange for Satan's aid in regaining not just his old post, but the very bishopric he once declined, Theophilus was compelled to perform the ultimate act of apostasy, to renounce Christ and the Virgin Mary. The agreement was to be sealed not with ink, which can fade, but with his own blood, a potent symbol signifying that the life force itself was being pledged, a down payment on the soul's eventual forfeiture. And the devil, as is his reputation, delivered. Theophilus became the bishop. He got what he wanted, but the victory was hollow, and a chilling, gnawing fear for his immortal soul began to consume him. He repented, embarking on a 40-day fast, praying fervently to the Virgin Mary for forgiveness. The legend tells that she appeared to him, her face initially stern, chastising him for his profound betrayal. But his persistent, desperate pleas eventually moved her to promise her intercession with God. After a further 30 days of fasting, she appeared again, this time granting him absolution. But the devil is a stickler for contracts. He does not easily relinquish what is his. 3 days after being granted this divine pardon, Theophilus awoke with a heavy weight on his chest. It was the parchment, the blood-signed pact. Physical proof of his damnation, delivered to his bedside as a terrifying reminder. He took it to the legitimate bishop, the one he had supplanted, and in a state of terror and relief, confessed everything. The bishop, seeing the truth of it, took the contract and burned it. Freed from his pact, Theophilus is said to have died of joy shortly thereafter, his soul saved at the final hour. The narrative became a cornerstone in the architecture of deal with the devil folklore. It did more than just warn against demonic congress. It powerfully affirmed the Church's capacity for redemption, while cementing the blueprint of the diabolical pact for centuries to come. Some names are just names, others are legends, and then there are the names that become an idea. Faust. Say it, it tastes of ambition, of dust from forbidden books, of the sulphurous smoke that rises when you mix knowledge with damnation. Before he was a character in a play, he was a man, or perhaps a rumour that wore the skin of a man, a spectre haunting the roads of early 16th century Germany. The historical Johann Georg Faust, active around 1480 to 1541, was an itinerant alchemist, astrologer, and wandering magician. Contemporary accounts paint a picture of a man viewed as both a charlatan and a blasphemer, a figure of scandal and intrigue. The respected Benedictine abbot Johannes Trithemius wrote a letter in 1507, warning of a certain Georgius Sabellicus, Faustus Jr., Fons Necromanticorum, the font of all necromancers. This Faust, Trithemius fumed, was a braggart and a fraud who boasted that he could reproduce all the miracles of Christ. He was accused of abusing a teaching position through acts of sodomy and was run out of the town of Ingolstadt. Other records place him performing horoscopes for bishops, a man whose skills, real or imagined, kept him in the orbit of power. Legend claims he went to the Speser forest near Wittenberg, to a place where the roads crossed and the shadows were deep, and there he made his infamous pact. His end was as sensational as his life. He died in an explosion in a hotel room in Staufen, an alchemical experiment gone catastrophically wrong. His body was found so mangled and torn that his clerical enemies nodded grimly and said with certainty, "The devil came to collect his due." This historical ghost, this tapestry of verifiable presence and sensational rumour, was the perfect raw material for a playwright, especially a playwright in Elizabethan England, a time of violent religious change and explosive new ideas, a time of Christopher Marlowe. Marlowe took the grubby, scandalous life of the German magician and forged it into a tragedy that would burn itself into the Western imagination. His Doctor Faustus is a titan of intellect, a Renaissance man at the pinnacle of his field, a scholar whose waxen wings did mount above his reach. Having mastered divinity, medicine, and law, he finds them all wanting. He turns to the metaphysics of magicians and necromantic books, looking for a power beyond mortal grasp. The Pact is a chillingly formal affair, a business transaction with hell, a contract, signed in his own blood, that grants him 24 years. 24 years with the demon Mephistopheles as his personal servant, in exchange for his immortal soul. Mephistopheles, a fallen angel tormented by his own separation from God, tries to warn him. When Faustus asks where hell is, the demon gives a chillingly simple answer. Why this is hell, nor am I out of it. Hell isn't a place you go to. It's a state of being you can never leave. Faustus, blinded by ambition, dismisses the warning. What is an eternity of torment compared to 24 years of being a god? But the powers he gains seem almost pathetically trivial. He uses his cosmic abilities for worldly pleasures and cheap tricks, conjuring the ghost of Alexander the Great for the emperor's amusement, playing humiliating pranks on the Pope, and, most famously, summoning the legendary Helen of Troy. In her impossible beauty, he finds a momentary poetic bliss, murmuring, "Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium?" Yet these distractions cannot silence his conscience. He is haunted by doubt, counselled by a good angel, but he proves incapable of true repentance. The theological currents of Marlowe's time, particularly Calvinistic ideas of predestination, cast a long shadow over the play. A subtle but terrifying variation between two versions of the play, the A text and B text, frames the central question. The A text says, "Never too late if Faustus will repent," suggesting choice. The B text says, "Never too late if Faustus can repent," raising the horrifying possibility that his damnation was sealed from the start, that redemption was never truly within his grasp. In the end, there is no escape. As the clock strikes midnight on his final day, his final soliloquy is a scream of terror, a desperate plea to stop time, to hide from the wrath of God. But the clock ticks on. His body is torn limb from limb, and his soul is dragged, screaming, into an eternity of that hell he once dismissed as a fable. For 2 centuries, that was the story of Faust, a grim warning, a theological horror story. And then came Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. A titan of the German Enlightenment, Goethe picked up the old legend and saw something different. He saw a story not just about sin, but about the human condition itself. His Faust is not just a greedy scholar. He is a man consumed by a profound ache, a Weltschmerz, a world weariness. He has learned everything and he feels nothing. He is drowning in dissatisfaction, and he yearns for one single moment of experience so perfect, so transcendent, that he would want it to last forever. This yearning forms the heart of his deal with Mephistopheles. It's not a sale. It's a wager, a cosmic bet. Goethe's Faust says to the devil, "If you can give me a moment of such pure contentment that I say to it, 'Linger on. You are so fair. Zrania, then you win. Then my soul is yours.'" It's a profound shift. Faust is no longer just a sinner. He is an existential gambler, and his very essence is the stake. This Mephistopheles is a different breed of demon. He is witty, cynical, a spirit that eternally denies. He introduces himself as a part of that power which always wills the bad and always works the good. He is the grit in the oyster that creates the pearl. The tempter who, by trying to drag Faust down, will inadvertently push him to strive ever higher. This is all set up in the prologue in heaven, where the Lord himself gives Mephistopheles permission to tempt Faust, arguing that, for man's activity can easily abate, he soon prefers uninterrupted rest. The devil's meddling is a divine tool to prevent spiritual stagnation. The journey Mephistopheles takes him on is epic. He tastes the intoxicating tragedy of young love with the innocent Gretchen, a love that leads to ruin, her damnation a direct consequence of his selfish pursuit of experience. Then, in the sprawling great world of Part 2, he walks through mythology and history, experiencing power, beauty, war, and creation. He is constantly moving, constantly striving, and that, in the end, is what saves him. This restless, relentless striving. In the final moments, as Mephistopheles prepares to claim his prize, angels descend from heaven. They snatch Faust's immortal soul away, proclaiming, "He who strives on and lives to strive can earn redemption still." Goethe's Faust is saved, not because he was sinless, far from it, but because he never gave up. The deal with the devil is no longer a one-way ticket to hell. It is the beginning of a lifelong, painful, beautiful journey towards self-discovery. Forget the universities of Germany. Forget the theological debates. Come with me to the Mississippi Delta during the age of Jim Crow, to a place where the earth is flat and black and rich, and the air is so thick with heat and humidity you can drink it. This is where the blues was born, out of hardship and hope. And this is where a new kind of pact was made. A deal not for knowledge, but for music. A deal for the soul of a man named Robert Johnson. His life is a ghost story. Born in Hazelhurst, Mississippi, around 1911, the concrete facts are scarce, leaving a void that myth and speculation eagerly filled. What people who were there agree on is this. As a young man, Robert Johnson wanted to play the guitar more than anything. And he was terrible. Musicians like Son House and Willie Brown would recall how he'd pick up a guitar and make a racket, driving everyone crazy with his clumsy, awful playing. And then he disappeared. Maybe for 6 months, maybe for a year and a half. Nobody knows for sure where he went. When he came back, he walked into a juke joint where the old masters were playing, and he asked if he could take a turn. They rolled their eyes, expecting the same old noise. But what came out of that guitar? It was impossible. It was sorcery. His fingers danced over the frets, pulling sounds from the strings that no one had ever heard before. The technique was dazzling, the emotion was bottomless. It was as if he had been completely remade. The people who had known him before were stunned into silence. And in that silence, a story was born, a legend to explain the impossible. The legend says that Robert Johnson, desperate to be a great bluesman, took his guitar and he walked. He walked to a deserted crossroads at midnight. The location is often pinpointed to the intersection of Highway 61 and 49, down near Clarksdale, Mississippi. And there, under a Mississippi moon, he waited. A large black man appeared, a figure widely interpreted as the devil himself, or perhaps an echo of older African trickster deities like Papa Legba or the Yoruba Eshu, guardians of gateways and masters of spiritual exchange. This entity took Johnson's guitar, tuned it, played a few bars of a melody that was both terrifying and beautiful, and then he handed it back. The deal was done. Johnson had his genius. The price, of course, was his soul. This narrative, however, was not unique to Robert Johnson. The story of selling one's soul at the crossroads for musical talent had also been associated with, and possibly originated from, an earlier, unrelated bluesman named Tommy Johnson. Tommy Johnson actively cultivated a sinister persona and, according to his own brother, personally claimed to have made such a pact to gain his guitar skills. This overlap suggests a shared folkloric tradition within the blues community, a potent motif passed between musicians. The crossroads itself, a place of decision and transition, takes on a profound significance. For African Americans in the Jim Crow South, life was a constant navigation of perilous intersections, of stark choices with limited options. The blues, often labelled the devil's music by more devout communities, existed at its own crossroads between the sacred and the secular, making the legend of a diabolical pact for musical prowess all the more resonant. Robert Johnson never discouraged the rumours. In fact, he fed them. His songs, the mere 29 tracks he recorded, they are the gospel of his own dark legend. People search his lyrics for confessions. His most famous song, Crossroad Blues, is a cry of anguish. He's at the crossroads, falling to his knees desperately, asked the Lord above, "Have mercy now, save poor Bob, if you please." He doesn't mention the devil by name, but the feeling is there. The dread, the loneliness, the sense of being trapped. Other songs are more direct. In Me and the Devil Blues, he sings it plain, with a chilling intimacy. "Early this morning, when you knocked upon my door, and I said, 'Hello, Satan, I believe it's time to go.'" He doesn't sound like he's fighting. He sounds like he's greeting an old, grim business partner. "Me and the devil," he sings, "was walking side by side." He even attributes his own violence to this companionship, singing, "And I'm going to beat my woman until I get satisfied." And then there's "hellhound on my trail." You can hear the paranoia, the sweat on his skin. And "the days keeps on worrying me. There's a hellhound on my trail." Is it a literal demon coming to collect on a debt? Or is it a metaphor for the ever-present threat of lynch mobs, the bloodhounds of racial terror, transformed into a supernatural pursuer? Maybe it's both. That's the power of it. The hellhound was real one way or another. His death sealed the legend. It was 1938. He was 27 years old, granting him posthumous membership in the infamous 27 Club. The most prevalent story is that he was playing at a juke joint near Three Forks, Mississippi. He was flirting with a woman, the wife or girlfriend of the man who ran the place. The man, in a fit of jealousy, gave Johnson a bottle of whiskey, a bottle laced with strychnine. Fellow bluesman David "Honey Boy" Edwards, one of the last living links to Johnson, swore he was there and tried to warn him. But he drank it. He reportedly lingered for several days in agony before he died. Conflicting theories attribute his death to complications from syphilis or Marfan syndrome. But the ambiguity surrounding his demise, much like the ambiguity of his life, only served to strengthen the legend. For many, his death was simply the devil coming to collect his due. While Johnson's legend is the most enduring, he wasn't alone in trafficking in infernal imagery. His contemporary, P.T. Wheatstraw, a popular and influential bluesman in his own right, took a different approach. He didn't wait for rumours. He actively branded himself. He was the devil's son-in-law. He was the high sheriff from hell. Wheatstraw consciously wove this demonic persona into his music and his public identity, turning the Devil's Music label into a powerful marketing tool. His story provides a fascinating contrast to Johnson's, highlighting the difference between a cultivated artistic persona and a legend that grew organically from a place of genuine mystery and inexplicable talent. While the Faustian scholar wrestled with existential despair and the bluesman sought unearthly skill at a moonlit crossroads, another, far more brutal stage was set for the demonic pact, the era of the European witch hunts. Here, the whispered agreement with dark forces transformed from a folkloric motif or a personal spiritual crisis into a damning accusation, a piece of evidence that could lead directly from the village green to the torture chamber and the stake. Between the 14th and 18th centuries, with a terrifying peak from the 1580s to the 1640s, a wave of witch-hunting fervour swept across Europe. What had often been considered folk magic or maleficium, the causing of harm through supernatural means, was increasingly reinterpreted by ecclesiastical and secular authorities as something far more sinister: apostasy, heresy, and a formal binding pact with the devil. Christian belief, particularly as codified by theologians and inquisitors, held that witches renounced Christ, worshipped the devil at nocturnal Sabbaths, and in return received powers to work magic. This pact was seen as the ultimate spiritual treason that justified the harshest penalties. Women were disproportionately targeted, stereotyped as morally weaker, and thus more susceptible to the devil's seductions. The accusation of a diabolical pact became the cornerstone of the witch trial. This grim worldview found its most infamous codification in the Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches, published in 1487 by the zealous inquisitor Heinrich Kramer. Born from his own frustrated attempts to prosecute alleged witches, the book became a handbook for witch hunters, lending an air of theological and legal authority to the persecution. The Malleus was a deranged masterpiece of misogyny and paranoia, and it meticulously detailed the supposed nature of these pacts. They could be made through solemn ceremonies where witches gathered and the devil appeared in human form as the little master. The core of the pact involved an oath of homage. The witch would give herself to the devil, body and soul forever, and pledge to bring others into his power. This often included a formal renunciation of the Christian faith and a promise to desecrate sacred symbols. Perhaps most horrifically, the Malleus alleged that witches were instructed to make certain unguents from the bones and limbs of children, especially those who have been baptized, which, with the devil's help, would enable them to raise hailstorms, cause sterility, and even affect the minds of judges. The terror inspired by such beliefs manifested with horrifying clarity in cases like the Laudun possessions in France. In the early 1630s, a convent of Ursuline nuns in the town of Laudun claimed to be tormented and possessed by demons. They named the charismatic and often controversial local priest, Urbain Grandier, as the cause. The accusations may have been rooted in personal vendettas. It was suggested that the Mother Superior, Jeanne des Anges, had become obsessed with Grandier and accused him after he refused her advances. Grandier's fate, however, was likely sealed by more powerful enemies. Cardinal Richelieu, the chief minister of France, bore Grandier ill will due to the priest's public opposition to Richelieu's policies and for penning a biting satire against the cardinal himself. Jean de Laubardemont, a kinsman of the Mother Superior and an agent of Richelieu, was dispatched to Loudun to investigate, armed with a royal decree that effectively bypassed local judicial processes. A crucial piece of evidence produced during Grandier's trial was a purported diabolical pact, a physical document allegedly signed by Grandier and a host of demons including Lucifer, Satan, Beelzebub, Leviathan, and Astaroth, with a demon named Balberith as the scribe. This document, written in backwards Latin and adorned with strange symbols, promised Grandier the love of women, the flower of virgins, the respect of monarchs, honours, lusts, and powers, for 20 years. It was almost certainly a forgery, but it didn't matter. Grandier endured horrific torture, his legs crushed in a device called the boot, but he never confessed. Nevertheless, he was found guilty and burned alive at the stake in August 1634. His case a stark illustration of how the notion of a pact could be weaponized into a tool for political persecution. Even earlier, in the 15th century, the figure of Gilles de Rais, a once celebrated Marshal of France and companion in arms to Joan of Arc, descended into a maelstrom of depravity. A man of immense wealth, Rais became notorious for the ritualistic torture and murder of a horrifying number of children, predominantly young boys. As his vast fortune dwindled, a consequence perhaps of his extravagant and shadowed lifestyle, he turned with increasing desperation to alchemy and the whispered invocations of demons, a fevered attempt to conjure back his lost grandeur. He employed an Italian cleric and alchemist named François Prelati to conduct these unholy rites. Under the pale flicker of candlelight, they traced trembling circles on the cold earth, guided by a book rumoured to hold the very names of infernal legions, seeking to summon entities, including one he chillingly referred to as Baron. Rais, in his delusion, even penned a note, sealed with his aristocratic insignia, intended as an offering to any shade that might manifest, promising, "Whatever you want, except my soul and the curtailment of my life." A bizarrely specific caveat, a flicker of self-preservation in the encroaching darkness. In one particularly gruesome instance, at Prelati's urging, a silent offering was prepared. The heart, hand, and possibly the vacant eyes of a boy whose stolen breath still echoed in the chamber's silence. Despite these elaborate and horrific endeavours, Rice later confessed that he never actually saw or spoke directly with any demon. Yet the stain of his occult dabblings clung to his monstrous crimes. His trial in 1440 brought his unspeakable acts into the harsh glare of justice, and his descent into demonology became a significant thread in the tapestry of his condemnation. The societal repercussions were profound, leaving a scar upon the collective memory. Gilles de Rais became a chilling byword for aristocratic depravity and fathomless evil. Scholars say his legend, with its intense violence and occult tones, may have even influenced the legend of Bluebeard. Storytellers, perhaps in the dim light of hearth fires or the hushed tones of village gossip, inadvertently wove threads from one grim tapestry into the other. The sharp edges of historical horror softened, blending with the stark lines of fictional terror, until the true origins of each figure became a murky, almost indistinguishable shadow. Regardless of the truth, one fact is certain. The shadow of the stake, stained crimson by the deeds of Gilles de Rais, stretched long into the coming centuries, a grim reminder of the abyss that awaits when ambition devours the last vestiges of humanity. The ink may have dried on parchment pacts centuries ago, and the fires of the witch trials may have long since cooled, but the allure of the demonic bargain has not faded. Instead, it has shape-shifted, finding new forms and new devils in the landscapes of modern culture, reflecting our contemporary anxieties and our timeless fascinations. The core components of the Faustian bargain, insatiable ambition, profound temptation, moral compromise, and ultimately dire consequences, possess a remarkable adaptability. They appear in stories of athletes selling their souls for championship victories, as in the Broadway musical Damn Yankees, or in tales of musicians bartering for fame and love, like the titular character, in some interpretations, of the Phantom of the Opera. And of course, in the prestige television of our time. Consider Walter White in the series Breaking Bad. Diagnosed with terminal cancer and desperate to secure his family's future, he enters a Faustian pact of his own making, systematically shedding his moral values in exchange for power and wealth in the ruthless world of drug trafficking. His descent is a modern morality play, a slow, methodical selling of the soul, not for knowledge, but for a twisted sense of security and pride. The persistence of these narratives speaks to deep psychological truths. The deal with the devil often symbolizes a confrontation with the shadow self, those aspects of our personality that we repress or deny, the hidden desires and darker impulses that, under pressure, can surge to the surface. The character who contemplates such a pact is frequently driven by an insatiable ambition, a yearning to transcend ordinary human limitations. Underlying this ambition can be a profound fear of failure, of insignificance, or of mortality itself. The pact, in this light, becomes a desperate gamble for control in a seemingly indifferent universe. This is not always a sudden dramatic decision. As some scholars suggest, a Faustian bargain can manifest as a gradual sliding, a series of small, seemingly innocuous compromises made along the way, each one making it harder to turn back until one finds oneself irrevocably bound. It is the politician who accepts one questionable donation, the scientist who fudges one data point, the partner who tells one small lie that requires another, larger one, to maintain. These everyday Fausts populate our world, their bargains perhaps less spectacular, but no less corrosive to the integrity of the self. This is why these tales continue to captivate us. They tap into fundamental human concerns, the intoxicating allure of forbidden knowledge, the eternal struggle between good and evil, the complex nature of temptation, and the often staggering price of ambition. In many contemporary retellings, the devil has undergone a secularization. While the supernatural framework may linger, the adversary often becomes a metaphor for internal demons, addiction, obsession, unchecked ego, or external corrupting forces like societal pressure, corporate greed, or oppressive political systems. The soul, too, can be reinterpreted not just as a theological entity destined for heaven or hell, but as the seat of one's integrity, innocence, core values, or essential humanity. Walter White doesn't sell his soul to a literal demon, but he sacrifices his moral essence to his own pride and the seductive power of the criminal underworld, with consequences that are undeniably soul-destroying. Furthermore, the nature of what is offered by this metaphorical devil often mirrors contemporary societal anxieties. In earlier eras, when knowledge was restricted, Faust sought arcane wisdom. Robert Johnson, in a society that denied him so much, allegedly bargained for transcendent musical talent. Today, the demonic gifts might manifest as fame in an attention-driven economy, success in a hyper-competitive professional landscape, or a desperate escape from the dread of obscurity. The price evolves in tandem from literal damnation to psychological disintegration or profound societal alienation. The demon's pact, therefore, remains a dynamic cultural barometer, reflecting what a society values most, fears most acutely, and what individuals feel most profoundly deprived of. The ink on these contracts, whether written in blood or whispered in the silent anguish of desperation, never truly dries. It seeps through the ages, staining the pages of history and the celluloid of our modern myths. From the scholar's dust-laden study to the moonlit crossroads where the blues were born, from the inquisitor's shadowed chamber to the glaring lights of the silver screen, the bargain echoes. It is a testament to the enduring power of human desire, our capacity for blinding ambition, and the terrifying, irrevocable choices we face when confronted with our own limitations and the allure of what lies just beyond our grasp. The central tension remains immutable. The magnetic pull of boundless gain, pitted against the potential for an irreversible, often devastating loss of one's very humanity. These stories remind us that the brightest lights can indeed cast the deepest shadows, and that the relentless pursuit of more can lead to an emptiness no diabolical gift can ever truly fill. The demon's pact, in its essence, transcends the supernatural. It is a potent metaphor for the constant negotiations and compromises inherent in the human condition itself. Every significant choice carries its own trade-off, a price for a desired gain. Small bargains made along the way that can, almost imperceptibly, alter the trajectory of a life. For the devil, in his many guises, is ever patient. He always offers a deal. And everyone has a price. The question, lingering in the quiet spaces of our own lives, remains: what is yours?